Did you ever have those professors in college who talked about this toolbox that you were supposed to develop as an educator? It almost seemed like this mythical thing that you would just somehow get and possess all of these magical strategies and tools that would give you a beautiful classroom with no behavior issues. Did you hear about that too? I did. And over the past few years, I have definitely added a bunch of tools to my teaching toolbox, and that's what we are going to talk about today. I want to give you a handful of awesome tools that I've added to my management toolbox in hopes that they will be able to help you fill yours. So let's talk about the structure of this episode. We are going to start off by doing a quick walk back through time through my teaching career, so you have a bit of an understanding as to why I have this toolbox that I have. Then we're going to talk about how my toolbox has evolved since teaching middle school as opposed to elementary school. And then finally, it is going to be like a rapid fire session of different tools that I have in my toolbox in hopes that you can add them to your own. So without further ado, let's get into this. You might not know this, but when I first started teaching, it wasn't in middle school. I started teaching in 4th grade. And after my first year teaching 4th grade, the 5th and 6th grade ELA teacher was retiring. And so my school asked me if I would be willing to move up with my students. I said yes, and then the following year, I found myself in a 5th and 6th grade English class. However, teaching 4th grade versus teaching 6th grade was a very different experience. It honestly felt like a sitcom my first day of school teaching 6th grade. I had this crafty project for the kids to do, and they walked in, like finish a picture, and my middle schoolers were not having it. They came in, they switched desks, they switched names. It was like a sitcom. It was like a sitcom. And then when they went to special, after our homeroom period ended, I legit sat on my countertop and I cried. I was like, how on earth am I going to do this 179 more times? Like, this was hell. But it got a lot better. And then at the end of that school year, well, actually, halfway through that school year, our current principal had found a new job. They left, and in came a new principal. This new principal lasted for about 2 weeks, and then they quit. And then we had no principal for probably the span of like a couple of weeks to a month. After that time elapsed, we had 2 new principals come in, and they ended up sharing the role as principal. And come the end of the school year, they did a complete restructuring of our building. What had happened was our technology teacher had quit. They were relocating, and so there was an opening in technology. So what ended up happening is me being somebody certified to teach K through 6 and somebody certified to teach 7-12 English ended up taking on that role. Only I wasn't teaching technology, even though I was based in the computer lab. I was teaching informational literacy. What is informational literacy, you might ask? We honestly still don't really know. I got one piece of paper with standards from like 2006 or something ridiculous, and that was all of my guidance. But we made it. We managed through, even though it was incredibly challenging because I was teaching K through 8 that following year with a class that didn't really exist. There were no materials, no curriculum, and the way the classes were structured was ludicrous. So what happened was I had these classes in grade bands. One grade band was K through 2, one was 3 through 5, one was 6 through 8. And the younger grade, they had their specials periods broken down into 2 sections. So we had special for like 50 minutes, and for 25 minutes I would have one group of kids, and then we would switch, and I'd have a new group for the following 25 minutes. But these groupings did not make much sense. So what would happen is I might have a group of kindergartners at first, and then after those 25 minutes ended, I might have 5 of those kindergartners stay in my classroom, but then 17 second graders would come in and be with me for the first time that day. That made it so that I couldn't teach anything that really built on anything else. It had to be kind of one and done lessons every single day. Eventually the groupings ended up changing. It made a bit more sense, but it was still incredibly challenging. Then the pandemic hit, and then we went virtual. But before our school went virtual, I was advocating to get a tech teacher in the building and put me back into a classroom because the role I was doing did not make much sense. When the pandemic hit, it kind of became the perfect opportunity for that. I ended up taking over 6th grade online, and I ended up taking over math intervention as well. And then after that end of the school year stretch came to a close, we had summer, we came back to school in full person mode, and I was teaching 6th grade English and social studies. I taught that for the entire 2020-2021 school year. And then in the fall of 2021, I moved up to Boston, and I got my new job where I teach 6th grade English and social studies, and I did that last year, and I'm currently teaching that still. That's just a quick recap of my teaching career. So as you can probably imagine, doing all of those different roles, having so many different administrators has really helped me cultivate a strong toolbox because I've had to learn how to be flexible. Let's talk about how flexibility has helped me become a better middle school teacher, especially how it's changed my mindset coming from teaching the elementary grades to the middle grades. One of the most important things I have learned is how to self-regulate on the spot. So when I find myself getting frustrated with middle schoolers, like power struggles, they're no good. They are not good in any grade, but especially in middle school. Like these kids, they are born to debate. And if you teach middle school, you know how it is. So self-regulating can really help you avoid these power struggles because it gives you a chance to breathe, literally, and think about how you want to proceed in a way that's going to help you, the classroom, and the student who's exhibiting a behavior that's probably frustrating you. Another thing I've learned since teaching middle school over the past few years is how I need to view my students in a way that helps them want to respect me. To give you an example, when I first started teaching 6th grade, I gave my students these surveys, and the surveys were at the end of the school year asking for general feedback, and a bunch of my surveys came back saying that the students felt like I was treating them like babies, like I wasn't viewing them as these mature preteens, and that they wanted to feel that way. And I took that feedback to heart. So when I was teaching the older kids the following year, even though it wasn't a special, I still made sure that I was trying to bring that energy and show my students that I did respect them, and I saw that they were older than the younger kids, and I wanted to give them more responsibilities and different expectations. And I think doing that made them feel seen, and that was one of the first things that made me start evolving my classroom management approach. And honestly, if you've heard me talk about management before, you know that I do something a little bit different. My goal is not for students to respect me because they feel like they have to. My goal is for students to respect me because they want to. And developing that want is kind of the guiding principle in everything I do when it comes to management. If you want to hear more about my system in depth, definitely go back and check out my previous episodes or click the link in my bio that has levels in it. And you can honestly skip through all of the slides of my management system and view it for yourself. But I call it levels and it has changed my life. But again, that's a story for another time, or go back and hear the stories. And finally, the last thing that I started doing that's helped me evolve my approach when it comes to middle schoolers is thinking about my ideal classroom environment, but also thinking about the tools and what I am doing to help myself and my students get there. So let me paint this picture for you. My second year teaching, I really wanted to have this fun environment where it felt warm, it felt welcoming, we could joke around and have fun, but the expectation I was enforcing is that my students were silent when they were working, when they would come in, when they were raising their hands. There was no structure for joking, and in turn, I think that created more of a cold environment that I definitely wanted to cultivate. So I think it's important for us as educators, especially if we are trying to create this environment that is warm and welcoming, to think about the structures in place that are actually teaching our students how to exhibit what we want to see. So if I want my students to be able to banter and joke, but also be able to work and get their work done well and be engaged in the lesson, I need to teach them how to read the room. I need to teach them how to pick up on social cues, to know when it's time to laugh and when it's time to get back to work. And I actually do. I teach those things. And if you want to hear more about that, I definitely can make episodes on how I teach those social skills. But it's important. We can't expect our students to create this classroom environment that we want to be in if we literally are not giving them the tools to create it. Aligning the environment that you want to cultivate with the expectations that you actually hold or that you scaffold to that point is really important. And sometimes doing a deep dive and thinking back to, wait, am I actually creating and enforcing the environment that I want to be in, or am I enforcing an entirely different thing, can be really helpful when it comes to strengthening your management toolbox. All right, and now finally, let's dive into some tools that you can start using tomorrow to help you in your classroom. Number one, you have heard me talk about this all the time, but it is having a pre-made response ready to go for behaviors. I have a graphic organizer that I send out to my email list about every other month or so, and it gives you an actual template to follow to help you craft a response to a undesirable behavior. So if you want that, definitely click the link in my bio, which says join the email list or something like that, and you'll be getting that freebie very soon. Second tool for you is to self-regulate. My second tool for you might sound a bit ridiculous, but it is to self-regulate. Not just you, but also your students. So let me talk about that. When you find yourself getting hyped up in the classroom and feeling frustrated, feeling overwhelmed, even just stepping back for 10 seconds and doing a breathing exercise can help your body tremendously. And it feels ridiculous. It's kind of like one of those things that you don't want it to work because it sounds so silly, but it does. It resets your central nervous system. And taking those few seconds to calm yourself before addressing your class can do wonders for your classroom environment and the classroom culture that you're cultivating. Likewise, self-regulation can also be super important for your students. And I'm not talking about just teaching them how to do this. I'm talking about co-regulating with them. If you have a student who is really upset, maybe they're crying or they're really angry, even just being in their presence and modeling breathing and saying, hey, can you try to match my breathing right now, can do wonders for them. I have seen it pull students out of panic attacks. It is crazy. The power in co-regulation. It's one of those skills where I was like, wait, why have I not been doing this since day one? It has changed my craft that much. My next tool is to never say anything that you cannot enforce or that you don't particularly want to enforce. Like if you tell your students that if they do this, they'll be after school with you, but like you really don't want to be after school, don't say that. Only say what you can enforce because your students will know. They're going to know if you are not true to your word, and if you're not, they're going to call you out on it, or they're going to push your limits because they feel like they can get away with different things. So whatever you say, enforce, and don't say what you cannot enforce. My next tip is for us as a teacher, and it's to think about why we're getting triggered in different situations. So for me, I found myself getting incredibly anxious when students would start yelling or raising their voice. Even if it had like nothing to do with me and they were just excited about the game, I found myself getting really anxious. And being able to identify that and recognize that I was having an emotional response to a behavior that might have nothing to do with me was game changing for me because it gave me perspective. And it made me realize that just because my fight or flight was engaged doesn't mean that the situation I'm dealing with is that extreme. So being able to take your own inventory of what's triggering you with different behaviors can help you respond in a more proactive and productive way. My next tool is to think about the why behind certain behaviors. All behaviors come from a need. So when you have a student who's misbehaving, think about why they're actually doing that. So for example, and this is not like even like a misbehavior thing. This is more like a school policy I have to enforce kind of thing. It's the hat. If you're a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, you know the hat and hood struggle. And if we should or if we shouldn't have it, that's a whole podcast episode for another time. But my school makes us have no hats. So I had the student who was coming in and wearing a hat. Day one, I was like, hey, you gotta take the hat off. They took it off. Day two, they came in, hat on again. I was like, hey, you gotta take it off. They took it off. Day three, they came on with the hat again. And I was like, hey, what's going on here? Like, I have to tell you this every day. Like, you know, I got to enforce this, but why do you keep wearing it anyways? And upon talking to the student, they were telling me that they just didn't like their hairstyle right now, but they're going to go to the salon to get it changed in a couple of days. So they just feel really self-conscious up until then. Just having that conversation and being like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, that's frustrating. I used to hate having bad hair days in middle school. Like, it's rough out there, but I appreciate you cooperating and following the school dress code. After that day, I did not have to remind that student about their hat again because I talked to them and I found I was actually making them want to wear the hat. And it wasn't them wanting to give me a hard time. It wasn't them trying to be defiant or start stuff. It was just them literally not liking their hair and taking that step back and thinking about what is the root behind the behavior that we're seeing is so helpful when it comes to your classroom management. My next tip is you and the student versus the problem. Here's what I mean by that. When you are having an issue with a student, maybe they are interrupting you, maybe they're being defiant, whatever it is, I want you to try framing that situation not as you versus the student. I want you to frame it as you and the student versus the need to interrupt, or you and the student versus the need to be defiant. Once you can put you and your student on the same exact team and you show them and you prove to them that you feel that and you believe that, you start to win that student's trust and you can win them over and you can actually give them life skills to help them through challenging situations. So reframe situations, think about them not as you versus the student, but as you and the student versus the behavior. On the same token, I want you to think about positioning when it comes to you and your students. Yeah, I'm talking about like physical positioning. When you pull your student into the hallway who's giving you issues in class, I don't want you to stand across from them. I want you to stand, or better sit, next to them. Shout out to my therapist for teaching me this. But when you position yourself across from somebody else, you physically position your body as their adversary. I know, I was like mind blown when I heard that too for the first time. But you do. So when you change your physical position and instead you put yourself next to that student, it makes it seem and it makes it feel like you and that student are on the same team, like you're united. And there is so much power in that. And I have seen huge results just from changing the way I position myself in the hallway when I conference with students. My next tip is to have your students fill out anonymous questionnaires just to give you some feedback, give you a temperature gauge on how the class is going and how they're doing in your class and how they're doing personally. Showing your students that you care about what they say, that you want to hear from them, is life-giving to your classroom, and it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. And finally, my last tip, much easier said than done, is to not take this job too seriously. Teaching is a super important job, and what we do is so impactful and it makes a difference. It truly does. But our job is our job and our life is our life. And it's important to be able to draw a very clear line between those things and to make sure that we are taking care of our own needs and we're also living a life outside of being Ms. or Mr. or Mix or Miss. We got to be ourselves. So when you can, don't take our job too seriously. Punch out and know that you deserve to punch out. You deserve to smile and enjoy your life after 3 p.m. So those are my top tools. They're in my management toolbox, and I hope that you found them helpful. If there are some tools that you think I missed or I should include, please let me know in the comments or DM me on Instagram. And truly, thank you for being here. I love this little corner of the internet that we are creating together, and I truly appreciate every one of you who tunes in every week and watches or listens. So thank you for all that you do. And until next time, you've got this.